Hey everyone, it's Luke here, just with a quick module about essay and presentation writing basics, particularly paragraphs and sentence structure. I've been wanting to run through this stuff with you for a while, and the reason is that it very rarely gets focused on because of all the other content in your classes, and there's a bit of a, expectation that you just sort of pick it up through the kind of, the vapors of being on campus and definitely improving by attending class and listening to the feedback of your tutors and lecturers for sure, but so rare that we can get a pocket of really getting a clear understanding of what we need to do and applying those skills and developing those skills. So this will give you an opportunity to focus on that if you know for yourself from your own metacognitive self-assessment that this is something that needs to be worked on, that you could improve on. And trust me when I say these skills, you will use them in your entire professional life, because so many jobs now are just so much about good, effective communication. So whether you're writing something down and sending it off and you need to present best you can, or you're presenting live and in person, getting structure right and understanding the anatomy of paragraph and different kinds of sentences and how they work is going to help you in this class for our assessments remaining, and it's going to help you in your career and whatever you seek to do. Arguably, it could help you in your relationships and your marriages and things like that as well, and your relationships with your kids as well, because if you get better at explaining yourself, then you will do better in the world. Now, learning outcomes from this module that you're listening to, reviewing the link between how and why questions, causation and analysis in the framework that I've just hinted at a couple of times in class. X is Y because of Z. Okay, we'll have a quick look at that. Also reviewing the differences between academic and informal writing styles, and in some of my conversations with people over email and after class, we've been able to refer back to that chart. So they are sort of key documents that can, and some of these things are kind of litmus tests or reminders for you to say, does this pass this test? From there, we go to identify and apply different kinds of sentences in paragraphs, identify and apply good paragraph structure, identify the basic structure of an essay, and the same thing applies to other forms of communication. So presentations, for example, in your pitches, and for even arguably or many kinds of conversations that you might have or other ways of communicating with people. So lastly, designing an essay structure based on topic sentences. We'll have a quick look at that. So let's just quickly review answering how and why questions. This is the key. You get the facts right: what, where, when, who, where were the elements, who was involved, what are we trying to explain and describe here. It's when we get to the how and why questions that we address issues of causation and analysis. So in creative writing, there's a popular reference of, the king died and the queen died, and there's like two events. But now you have a story when you say the king died and the queen died of grief. There's an element of causation, and we now have a story and we now have something interesting. This isn't a creative writing class, but for some reason humans are compelled by finding causes and links between different events. So don't just settle for the facts and the who and the what and the where and the when. Push yourself to go into the how and the why of issues. When you're doing that, that is when you are analysing the topic at hand. So when I discovered the power of X is Y because Z, that really changed my life and set me on a new path for being able to better communicate with people for a whole range of things. Okay, because of this background or because of this context or because of this theory or whatever you are talking about. Now, the second thing we want to review is the writing style matrix here. We've seen a bit of confusion in early assessment about using non-academic writing and frameworks when we're trying to encourage academic writing, and this is a fantastic litmus test for getting this stuff right and running your own stuff and your own content through this matrix to see where your material falls. Now, if you're a journalist, if you're producing content for a public audience or for an uninformed audience, then going in the left-hand column is going to be completely appropriate. If you're presenting live, we tend to, even in an academic setting, we tend to pepper in non-academic elements to gain people's trust, to keep them a little bit off balance, to stimulate them in some way. But we still try to stick to academic, specialized frames of reference, and the stylistic elements, they improve what we're saying. That's widely recognized throughout academic work. Okay, so even if you come down to the element of humour and dramatic elements, it's rare, but it's not absent, it's rare. The humour, if used, is often very dry and droll and kind of minimalised, and you'll have these sort of peppered laughter throughout sort of conferences and so on. And then, in the drinks afterwards, you'll have people absolutely letting rip on stuff and being very much more creative and much looser. But when people are presenting their academic work, that's the style. Okay, so capturing that balance, this is a great thing for you to do now. It'll put you in great stead with your careers. Now, when it comes down to writing paragraphs, there are different kinds of sentences, and some of you might be familiar with some of these. Some people have fed back to me about TEAL, which is topic, example, evidence, and then a link, and this is very similar to that. Okay, so your topic sentences is like your opening sentence for writing paragraphs. It's the main idea of the paragraph, and it sets an expectation of what's to come. You're constantly making a deal with your listener about what is going to follow, and ultimately, why is it worth spending the time on this material? So most paragraphs have one topic sentence. It may not be first, but it mostly is. The exception that proves the rule is when your first sentence of a paragraph is addressing something that came before, or is offering some kind of provocation that's a little wider and just sort of setting the scene, so that then your second sentence is your topic sentence and states the main idea of the paragraph. So there are exceptions and there's stylistic flourishes, but first use the system and show that you understand the rules before you start bending and breaking the rules. So developing sentences come next. So you might have a topic sentence that states 2 or 3 different elements of importance. It might be a research area, a focus group that was like the subject of the research, and then a kind of a revelation about it that makes it relevant to you. Okay, so then your developing sentences are going to want to prioritize those elements and then expand on those ideas. Tell us, depending on the focus of the paragraph, what's most important. So tell us about the research method, tell us about the people involved who are the target, and then tell us about why it's relevant to your project. Okay, now that last one might not be a developing sentence. It might be a transitional sentence for your own paragraph about, say, for example, the application to your own research. Okay, so a developing sentence, and some sentences might be a mix of developing and transitional, depending on your scope of what you're saying. So if you don't have the scope, in the 2 or 3 sentence responses, say in your literature review, you're not expected to fill out all of this. It's up to you to show that you can control the scope of what you write. A transitional sentence will take the discussion from one idea to the other, and you'll often come up with linking words like in contrast, however, as a result of this, therefore, following on from this, on the other hand, and so on. So phrases like that come at the start and middle and occasionally at the end of sentences help us frame the content that you're discussing, okay, and kind of visually kind of map it in relation to the other things that you've already said, or you're kind of laying the seeds of something that you'll go on to talk about. And that's important. When you make these transitional phrases and sentences, you are linking the material together and you're kind of guiding the reader or the audience through your material, and that applies whether you are writing something and submitting it for them to read or presenting live. Arguably, we do these sentence types even at a party when we say, oh my God, did you hear about this person? And they say, oh yes, no, well, oh, this is what happened. And you don't immediately hit them with the detail. You say generally what happened, and you say, oh, and then they said this, and how'd they feel about that? Well, and so these are like your developing sentences and your transition. Hang on a minute, but was all this going on while so-and-so was in the pantry? Oh, absolutely. And then you're transitioning away to something else. Okay, so even though those rules get broken heaps when you're, say, in a party or a dinner conversation or something like that, a much more casual setting, humans require a kind of cognitive pattern for storytelling, and to understand multiple things going on and joining them in a causal sequence, there's something about our brains that requires that, and that's the thing that's in common, even though we've looked previously that these settings aren't the same when we're comparing non-academic to academic settings for different kinds of communication. Lastly, we have terminating sentences. So these summarize what's gone on and just it's like the guide stopping and saying, right, have you got everything with you? Do you understand what we just did? And here's a bit of a reminder of the ground that we covered. Okay, so in the example that we started with, so we talked about this element and why it's important. we mentioned this audience, so you might like restate things, and you could do that in a very dogmatic way that would really slow you down and perhaps not show that you fully control your material. However, just take on board the general point and try to demonstrate that you are wrapping up the paragraph and moving us on to something else. Okay, and I mean, sometimes these transitions or summaries overflow and again play like a mixed role and a hybrid role. Okay, so you're terminating the paragraph, but you may also be transitioning to the next paragraph. And likewise, we said at the start, your topic sentence might not come first, and it varies case by case, but the first sentence of your paragraph might actually be transitioning and recognizing what came before. And that's a judgment thing, and that is why it's art. This is the art of being able to control these rhetorical and rational and persuasive elements. So we've got an example here that comes from a really prestigious writing source in the USA, but it's extremely old-fashioned. It was a little bit sexist, and I've completely updated it. So you wouldn't want to quote this, but it's all about the color red. Okay, now try and identify the 4 types of sentences here that we had before. So topic sentences, developing, transitional sentences, and terminating sentences. Okay, red is a color that can affect how people feel and react. That's clearly a topic sentence. It's broad. Let's go into some detail. Red makes heads turn, and the person associated with the colour may feel more important and influential. Arguably, a red Porsche draws more attention than a blue one. So now we're going into examples of the developing sentence about heads turning and how the person wearing red might feel. Okay, a red tie or power tie can be bold and assertive. Someone wearing a long red dress with matching nails is also likely to attract the eye. So we've got some different examples, different settings where the same rule applies. So these are developing sentences, and if you're following the teal model of topic, example, evidence, and link, then we're going into some examples, and evidence is not really a factor. Now, look, a bit controversial here. We're starting a new paragraph. However, red can also signal danger or alarm. Now, that is clearly a transitional sentence. It's telling you, however, stop and think for a second. We are turning, come with me, while we turn to this new interpretation of what red can mean. Many signs use red to convey warnings. Not only are many stop signs red, even without text, red traffic lights tell drivers to stop. Nonetheless, okay, this is another transition. Nonetheless, so all that being said, perhaps it can be argued that a common element across these varying examples is the use of red to draw attention for some reason, even if those precise reasons differ. That is a terminating sentence. It's not last, but again, it's about judgment. It's taking the initial idea from earlier in the paragraph, in the previous paragraph, about how red affects people's reactions and feelings. Okay, and it's restating it, but now with it's restating it in a way that includes the elements that have come before in those developing and transitional sentences. Can you see that? Okay, so finally, what does this imply for political uses of red, such as communism, unionism, or national flags? Now, there's a lot going on here, even though we're just talking about this stupid thing and we haven't got any evidence and we're not engaging with research, but we've already got a bit of complexity. So let's go back. We've got our terminating sentences that are summing up, and then a transition to something else that's creating a link to a new context in which to discuss red at the very end. Now, the controversial element here, and this is again where it's an art and you get marked at uni on using your judgment. So I hit return to make, however, red can also signal danger or alarm, a new paragraph, because I had a lot of information and I just thought I'm going to do the reader a favor and break up that information. Arguably, this entire section of text could be one paragraph, but I've made my judgment to say, no, there's enough examples going on. This is an important enough of a pivot. I'm hitting return, I'm creating a new paragraph. So technically breaking the rules, but also to show what the rules are and why I want to say, hey reader, come and make this turn with me. We are turning the corner on our information here. Okay, and these words like however and nonetheless, these signal that we are making a change, and new paragraphs signal that as well. But if all of this was in one paragraph, you could argue that would be fine to do. So it's a judgment issue. Now, this is an activity that you could do if you've got a study buddy. I've suggested that you find someone that you trust or get along with in the course and you develop work together, and you might have a small group to do that. If you're interested in this and if you want to improve how you communicate, if you're even just nervous about your ability to pull off the pitch that we have to do when we come back from break, from week 8 to up to week 11, then you might want to get this done and give this a crack. Just get in groups. Write a short paragraph of 4 or 5 sentences. The topic really doesn't matter. You can just pick that in the first 30 seconds. Okay, just get your most extroverted learner to pitch something there. Favorite holiday, movie, night spot, a political issue, how you spent your break, whatever. Anything you know something about. What we're doing is we're practicing structure, and that's what matters. Okay, just take 5 or 6 minutes of developing your paragraph on this topic. Okay, and we're not going to confuse it with our research, and we're not synthesizing data and talking about methods and applying these other elements of the course. We're going to keep it simple about structure. So go back to these topic sentences, developing sentences, transitional sentences, and terminating sentences, and see what you come up with. And please do have a debate about, is a sentence transitional and developing? Is a sentence a summary, a terminating sentence, but also a transitional sentence? Is there a good reason to put your topic second instead of first? Why would you do that? So discuss that in your group. Don't just all automatically agree. You can always have someone playing a devil's advocate role to prevent groupthink. Once you've done it, be prepared to read the work out. You can read it to each other and listen to what it sounds like, and if you've got multiple groups, then we can compare it. Now, we might actually do this activity in the week 7 workshop part of our lecture. Okay, so the lecture in week 7 is going to be developing skills, and we might come back to this and practice it then. Now, when it comes to paragraph structure and referencing, we might have multiple ideas going on in a paragraph. So we're getting away from pure structure and we're starting to factor in other elements. So let's say we want to write a paragraph about how devil's advocate can help disrupt groupthink. Okay, that was the example I mentioned before in your group activity. Okay, first thing I'd better do, I want to talk about devil's advocate, but first I need to talk about groupthink so that there's a context, because the devil's advocate role doesn't really make as much sense. It's just someone, maybe, we've all run into that, annoying person at a party who's devil's advocate on everything, and they're just, completely contrary. No, this is about a productive use of the devil's advocate role to stop everyone just agreeing with something and going along with it and not voicing the range that you want when you make good decisions, and, really limiting what happens. And there's some really great historical examples, like the Bay of Pigs incident, where America and Russia nearly went to open atomic war, where groupthink was an element that nearly caused events of huge significant ramifications. So I've got to define groupthink first, and look, when I'm thinking about this, Wikipedia and mainstream media, as we've discussed, not allowed, you know that. Let's see where we get to. I've got an empty page. Hello world, I'm logging on. My social media is going crazy. Oh, I'm getting distracted by a cute thing out the window, damn it. Okay, no, let's get a little bit of focus here. I'm not sure about this. I'm going to fake it till I make it. What comes next? Okay, let's start with our first sentence. A disadvantage that can occur when working in groups is groupthink. Great. Fantastic opening sentence. Now I want to develop that, okay? So it happens when all group members agree on decisions without any conflict taking place to ensure the best possible outcome. Okay, this is not a change of subject, and it is extending and defining what the initial problem stated, which is that groupthink is a disadvantage in groups, okay? But what about it? Okay, so this is addressing the what, when, where, and who. Okay, when does it happen? Who does it affect? What happens? And it's also addressing the how and why, in that it emerges when people just agree without any conflict. Okay, so that's addressing the causal connection and the causal drive behind groupthink. I want to just introduce the topic broadly in my topic sentence, but now that I'm going into detail, this is an opportunity to show my research. So let's chuck in. Yunsen suggests that groupthink happens when all group members agree, and so on. Okay, so this is a great opportunity. So we're mentioning Yunsen in text, and then we've got an in-text citation that we would have the Yunsen in our bibliography or reference list. Now, transition. This is also a developing sentence. However, a strategy known as the devil's advocate can be employed to rectify the problem of groupthink. When a member of a group is appointed as the devil's advocate, they will question all decisions with the purpose of promoting conflict to increase the performance of the group. So again, it's the who, what, where, and when, but it's causation and how does it work, and why would you introduce the devil's advocate role in terms of what are the results? Well, it will increase the performance of the group. And this is an opportunity to, again, we didn't make it up ourselves, so we're standing on the shoulders of people who have done the work for us. So let's just quote Baker, Barrett, and Roberts. Okay, we're not plagiarizing once we reference. And then we've kind of achieved our aim, but we're not finished. Therefore, okay, so we're summarizing. This signals the reader, come with us. Therefore, groupthink can be a disadvantage in group decision making, so we're restating stuff with the new context. But if the devil's advocate strategy is utilized, the advantages will outweigh the disadvantages. Okay, so this paragraph is not about groupthink and it's not about devil's advocacy. It seems to be now, with our terminating sentence, about the interrelation between groupthink and devil's advocacy, and saying that there can be a mix of advantages and disadvantages. Now, this might also be, as well as a terminating sentence, it may then go on to be a transitional sentence if the next paragraph is about what those advantages and disadvantages are, okay, and go into like an analysis of that. That is, addressing the how and why of those advantages and disadvantages. That takes us from a blank page when we are just, initial idea, I've got a couple of sources, I'm not sure how it's all going to work together. Start off with that topic sentence. What do I do next? Well, what are the elements in the topic sentence to elaborate? Okay, so we go into our developing sentences, and this is an opportunity to include research. We transition. We develop the transition. We keep using our sources and showing we've done our research. Now we sum up, but it's with a new context. It's restating, but it's not exactly the same. It's showing that there's a subtle interaction and interrelation between the two, the devil's advocate strategy and the groupthink problem, and that there are these mixed advantages and disadvantages, which is a perfect launching off point. There are the transitional sentences, the things that say, wait, reader, come with us. Now, the three elements of a good essay, speech or presentation, and as I said, part of it applies to conversations, but less so if we think with that writing matrix in mind. Or even you could look back on all of the tutorials that we've done and you could carve out this stuff as well, where we introduce stuff and we'll do the acknowledgement of country, and I will let you know what we are doing today. So it's the same thing about setting expectations. Then we move on to the main body. What are we going to talk about? How are we going to develop it? And we unfold and unpack stuff. If it's a class where I'm developing it, I'm responding to you, and you've seen me make changes based on what people are responding to or not responding to, what people are interested in, and how we end up sort of using our time. In an essay, you're exploring those ideas in detail, and it's a chance to show how your thoughts build off of research that you've done, and that you have the ability to synthesize your own independent thought from stuff that's happened before we all got born. Okay, like we didn't invent these ideas, they're out there, and we show that we can pick them up and use them as tools and create our own great material. The conclusion wraps things up and says, right, where are we now that we've done that great exploration? Well, here, and we can restate stuff, but with a new context of the examples that have been so illuminating to us, and the synthesizing that we've done, that is combining what was there before with our thoughts and our arrangements. Sometimes all we have to contribute is a new arrangement of pre-existing elements that weren't there before, and that can be very stimulating, very interesting, and most importantly for you as students, show that you have an understanding and control of the material. You can stop and ask yourself what they each do and define it for yourself. You can paraphrase me. If you're working in a group or you've got your study buddy there, you can paraphrase me, or you can disagree and say, no, I think the introduction also does this. I think the body does this, or the conclusion does this. Now, the other things that the introduction does is, in terms of setting expectations, you define your limitations and your scope. And we've talked about scope and limitations and where we're not going, and how to define our project that way with the development of our research project pitches. So this is time for a general discussion about the overall strategy, okay? And you can see that if you apply this to a conversation, I had the example before about what was happening while so-and-so was in the pantry, and it's heaps more loose, okay? And if you look at the writing style matrix, of course it doesn't add up, but What is that compelling element where we can't just go into instant detail? We're like, whoa, back up with the detail. Well, where are we? Why are we talking about this? Oh, okay, well, sorry, this is where we're coming from in this topic. Oh, okay, now it makes sense. Okay, what you said before makes sense. You were giving me elements of the body of the argument before you'd really set the scene and set any expectations with the introduction. Okay, so humans do that with communication, and it's your job in these university subjects to show that you're in control of how that information comes out and what you're doing with it, using it as a tool to connect and communicate and convey certain ideas. Okay, so let's look at our summary of learning outcomes. By now, you should understand how to review that link between how and why questions, how they relate to causation and analysis, and why are we interested in causation, and why analyze anything? Why not just move along the world, in perfect acceptance and never analyze a single thing? And if you can capture X is Y because Z, if you can capture that and apply it yourself to how you communicate, whether it's for university stuff or just trying to explain, to your partner why you're running late or you forgot their birthday or something, maybe you'll do better in life overall. I've got no idea. If you can put X is Y because Z into practice, you will do better when you communicate with others. Now, reviewing differences between academic and informal writing styles is key. It's not the topic of this, but you can really use this writing style matrix as a litmus test and a kind of a checklist for how you sound. Likewise, you should feel comfortable with identifying and applying different kinds of sentences in paragraphs. So we've got 4 different types: topic sentences, developing sentences, transitional sentences, and terminating sentences. Now, we've seen how that one sentence could play multiple roles and that the order might change depending on the context, what comes next and what came before. Identifying and applying good paragraph structure. Okay, so that goes to the heart of where we're going to place things and why, and this is where it is an art form. We're not technically rolling something out. There's no rinse and repeat here. You need to show that engagement, show that control of the subject matter. And you'll note that this presentation hasn't been about researching social media publics. It hasn't been about the content. It's been about how you convey what you know, how you show Esther and I what you know about this topic. Okay, it's not about the content, it's about the way you prove that you understand it. So then identifying the basic structure of an essay, and lastly, designing an essay structure based on topic sentences. So how to take that one sentence and turn it into an entire paragraph or indeed a succession of paragraphs. For example, if you're going to do a longer project like a PhD, or if you're writing a book, and some of you may have written books, then your first chapter, the whole thing might be an introduction. Okay, that might be 12 pages or 20 pages, and it all counts as an introduction. And it's all made up of those different types of sentences to move your reader through the different material. Writing is awesome. It's intimidating, but if you bring the right energy to it, like this young guy, you can really transform the way you communicate. And one of the things that you should be trying to do at university is turn your weaknesses into strengths. This is the end of the presentation, but maybe this is the first really in-depth look at structure and communication structure and writing structure, presentation structure that you've ever taken. Okay, so in that case, this might just be the beginning of your journey, and being able to express yourself and then help others express themselves will make you a deadly person in your career, someone who can cut through to the really relevant matters at hand. Your ability to differentiate yourself and win people's respect because you can communicate well is something that you should be trying to absolutely nail during your time at university here. All right, good luck everyone. I can't wait to see these pictures and read the final research proposals at the end of semester. Cheers.